Tim, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
It's good to have you. Good to have you. So, Tim, we'll go through your background very briefly. So, University of Bath or Bath, depending on which part of north or south you are. Bachelor of Engineering in Mechanical Engineering. You then joined ICG as your first role, spent kind of 2.5 years or so there. This is all from LinkedIn, so do jump in if any of these dates are wrong.
No.
Or any of the facts are wrong. But then spent some time in Avon Rubber. So, I believe that's the kind of face masks business, is it?
Respiratory protection.
Well, then you went over to PDD for 3 years, so design consultancy in West London, and I guess that's where you kind of got into the medical devices, and then Jarvis Medical as a contract for 18 months after that. 7 years at Herman Miller. Bit of a complete shift there. So from consultancy to in-house medical to then desks and kind of furniture, office supplies, And then you joined Dyson, 8 years at Dyson, kind of working through the ranks from senior engineer into engineering manager, and we'll touch on that shortly. After that, 2020, you joined the Imagination Factory, kind of getting back into design consultancy. And we could talk about some of the interesting stuff they're doing. And then 18 months ago, you founded your own design consultancy. That brings us kind of up to date. Have I missed out on anything there?
No, that's a good summary. Yeah, that's pretty much how it's been. So it's been some big companies, some small companies, from some very specific products and tasks to sort of stuff that's far more varied.
Absolutely. And like you say, quite a range there. Loads of patents, and you're definitely on the engineering side, aren't you? You're a mechanical engineer at heart, and when working in some incredible kind of product businesses there. So why don't we rewind the clock then and take it back to the late 80s, early 90s? What what got you into engineering, and why choose that?
It was an interesting one. So obviously always interested in the sciences and maths and stuff just at school, but I used to do a lot of art as well. So I quite like the design side, but I ended up doing maths, physics and chemistry for A-levels.
Brilliant.
But I didn't want to drop the design side, so I actually went and did an art foundation course.
Okay.
In my year before I went to university. And the expectation was I was going to go and do industrial design by the design course. I had to break it to them that I was already going off to do engineering. Yeah. So it was always sort of trying to keep a little bit of a balance between the design and engineering, because you can get drawn just down the very technical side of engineering, which can be quite bland and very narrow. And I wanted to keep sort of slightly more diverse. And it's something you hear a lot of people talk about. Like, I don't want to be too much of an engineer, but I don't want to be too much of a, it's a spectrum, and everybody finds their feet in that spectrum as to where they want to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted something a little bit more middle ground, basically. So,
and there's specific courses now, aren't there? Or there have been for some time, like with Loughborough and Brunel in particular, offering kind of that blend of upfront product design, but kind of with the DFM and the engineering kind of foundation around it. So you took it on yourself to kind of craft that experience, really. So that's great.
Kind of. But the first job I had at ICG was actually, it was called TCS at the time, but it's been through different namings since, sort of, and it's basically, it was called Teaching Company Scheme at the time. So it was shared employment between the university and the employer. But there you were obliged to be on a certain amount of training, do a certain amount of studying, as well as your day-to-day work. And it was great because you got all of the kind of CAD skills and, sort of learned some of the actual practical stuff you need day-to-day, which you don't necessarily get from a particularly academic university.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those things. But it was, it was a really good foundation for me. But, it was a small company. I wanted to move back down to Bath. So I was there for a couple of years, stayed on with the company after that scheme ended for a little bit longer, but then moved back down to Avon.
Well, so Avon Rubber, a company with tremendous heritage there. And they've been through, there's different branches in there around the country. And I think there's acquisitions and whatnot over the years. But the core business you're there is respiratory kind of face masks for the fire service and
for military applications was the main one. So when I was there, we were fortunate enough to be bidding for the US Joint Services mask, and it was a time they were looking to develop their sort of design capabilities, because at the time they would always use what we call a copy mill. So they would make the clay effectively out of the mold, and then they would copy it effectively. And then to make the different sizes, they would literally cut it in two, widen it, and stretch it, blend it all back in with the clay, and then create the next tool. So they weren't using any CNC or CAD or anything like that to generate their products. So I went there to sort of basically introduce them. So we were using SDRC Ideas at the time, and just basically introduced that system to them. We bid for the US mask. We weren't expected to get it, but actually resulted in winning the contract. So it's probably the most well-known thing that I've designed, but my kids and family get bored of me pointing it out whenever it's on TV and things like that.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic, and it doesn't seem like that long ago, really. I mean, it's obviously 20 years or so, but to think that when you joined them, they were still using that fairly traditional kind of method of mold making. That's incredible. So then you left Melksham and Bath, and you moved over to Hammersmith then, and joined PDD. So how did that come about?
Well, so there's a bit of a story about that. So I didn't actually leave Bath. I used to commute up to Hammersmith each day.
Crikey, how long did that take you?
So it was about 2 hours. Fortunately, Hammersmith's the right way.
Yeah.
But, not something you can probably do when you're a bit younger, but not something I would advise doing over a long period of time.
So that's 2 hours each way?
Yeah.
Blood crikey.
But really enjoyed the work. It was great. There's still a few people there who I know who were there a long time ago. But it's amazing. Yeah. It's a small world, so you cross over people in these different fields and different businesses thereafter. And do you know so and so? Oh yeah. Oh, you were the one who used to drive up and down the M4. Like, yeah, that was me.
Yeah, they've got a. Sorry, my cat's trying to get involved in the podcast. She's pure eye candy. Absolutely nothing to add to the conversation. But yeah, I mean, I know what you mean about PDD. It's got such a rich heritage, and the amount of people that I've spoken to that are in really kind of impressive positions now that have had PDD in their kind of their career is I've lost count of that, but it's some great people there.
Mm-hmm.
So bloody remarkable to do kind of 3 years there and that commute every day, because that was definitely well before kind of hybrid was was even in the vocabulary, I guess, with respect to working conditions. So
that's right, yeah.
So fair play. And then you went the other way. You did a contract in Gyrus. So
extend my M4 knowledge.
Yeah, but what's your favourite service station on the M4 then?
Don't get me started. Yeah, I mean it was a contract role. So sort of the nice thing about contract is it's good money. The downside is you don't have any real ownership though. So you don't necessarily feel you own. You're not responsible for it in the same way. It's not quite your baby. So it was medical process, checking out all the sort of tolerance stacks and a slightly more dull engineering kind of thing. But again, it was convenient for me at the time. So basically had a child, which is the reason I left, driving up and down to Hammersmith, basically. So Cardiff was that much easier. Gave ourselves sort of like just an hour commute either way. And, but a second child came along, so I needed to get a little bit closer to home, and was fortunate enough to contact through PDD. I'd actually moved down to work for Herman Miller, and he explained a little bit more about what stuff there was and what type of work, and that it wasn't all just wooden furniture being screwed together. That made it a little bit more appealing. So ended up working there in their
Brilliant. That's I always find that fascinating when you look at companies like Herman Miller and Brompton Bikes are the same as well. When I've worked with those and kind of other companies, on the surface they look like relatively straightforward products, and there's certainly a lot more interesting design and engineering challenges to be had at other companies. Also, it would seem kind of from the out looking in, but same with I had this with Brompton Bikes. I mean, if you look at it as someone with very little knowledge of what goes on there, you think, well, the bike's been around for 50 years. It hasn't fundamentally changed kind of how it looks or kind of how it operates. But actually, there's a team of, I think when I started working, there was like a team of 20 design engineers working there. And, there's so much that goes on behind the scenes and so much future innovation, material science. And I imagine it's the same with companies like Herman Miller as well. It's like once you get in there, you think, actually, there's loads of opportunity and challenges here. I want to just rewind slightly, actually. Obviously, you mentioned why you left PDD and joined Gyrus as the contract there, personal circumstances. But it's an interesting take because there'll be a lot of people right now, having just left Dyson, that might be contemplating contract work.
Yeah.
That step from kind of permanent employment to contract is always a big move, especially if you've got secure employment, like I guess you had at PDD.
Yeah.
So how did that come about for you? Because quite often you've got a notice period you've got to serve, and the contract market moves very quickly.
Yeah.
How did the timings work out for you then?
I mean, I was very fortunate in terms of it was a contract that was advertised. It was through an agency. So somebody else was, obviously found the work, and they were trying to find somebody to fill it. The difficulty was it was only sort of a month-to-month rolling contract.
Right. Okay.
But I think it was something like 3 to 6 months to start off with is what they were looking for. And then the nice thing is once you get there and you do a decent job, then they get to know you. You do start to become part of their system. Yeah. So I guess one of the things as a contractor is sort of you go in, you do a good job. Actually, you become a valued piece of the system, as it were. And really that's kind of, it's a lot easier then for them to roll your contract on moving forwards. So I think I was there for quite a while, but it was only a sort of month-to-month rolling contract beyond the sort of 3 to 6 months. So we'd be getting to the end of a month. I'd be giving my manager a little bit of a nudge saying, are we still going on next month, or do I need to be getting a few interviews in? Yeah. So there is a sort of insecurity that comes with it. But obviously that's why, sort of as a contractor, you get paid a little bit more because you don't get paid your holidays and all those kinds of things. So, that's it. And it's a bit of a balance, but it's, it's not for everyone, but it's an option. Definitely, keeps your foot in, and it can lead to other things.
Massively, yeah. Well, it's the same with anything. If you're good with people and you're good at your job, you build those relationships. Then, if the company needs that service, those skills, because essentially you're providing a service, aren't you, as a contractor? It's kind of one step short of being a consultancy in a lot of respects. But a company, if they still need that service fulfilling, they'd much rather go with a known kind of entity and someone that knows the business, and as opposed to start that whole process over again. So that's why you do tend to see kind of good contractors will kind of get those repeat kind of contracts. So kind of every 3 months will get renewed typically, and sometimes they can end there for some years in some cases. But so it's a little bit more challenging now with the IR35 rules. But yeah, interesting. So let's move on to Dyson then. So you left Herman Miller after 7 years, and Dyson either came knocking or you went out hunting for Dyson. How did that come about?
No, I went looking. As you say, sort of. There's some really complex technical stuff in chairs and tables, but there's a bit more going on in other products. And just wanted to sort of make that step to sort of a bit more of a technical challenge for myself, and also a bit more opportunity for growth potentially. So that was the reason. Oddly, I'd been for an interview at Dyson many years before. I actually took the job at Avon at the time, but I went for an interview, and broadly speaking, in the interview, they couldn't tell me what I'd be working on, who I'd be working with, and one of the guys was questioning why I hadn't gone to do something at the Royal Academy of Art.
Right, okay.
Rather than go into engineering. And I was like, sort of decided I'd start my career. So, so it was quite strange to then come back to it sort of so many years later. I had a much better interview with sort of much better communication. And it was great, sort of settled in. It's an interesting place at Dyson. And I think probably there'll be a lot of people who've been outside in the industry, in various industries, and gone into Dyson. Probably describe it as a little bit insular. That they, they like to do things their way. A lot of businesses would go and find somebody with some experience down the road who have done it for 20 years. Dyson would typically work out how to do it themselves.
Yeah.
Which is great from an innovation point of view because you're not inhibited by what's gone before or history. On the flip side of that is you're having to do a lot of legwork yourself, from day one. So
yeah.
It's definitely an interesting place. Some fantastically clever people, opportunities there that sort of not to just spend money, but to actually progress designs in a way that you probably unhindered more than you are financial constraints and things like that in other places.
Massively, yeah. It's so interesting as well that time difference from when you interviewed with them back in the late 90s to when you joined them, that business had changed so much, I imagine. Because I spoke to one of their original kind of team members last week, Mark Joinson Bickerstaff, and he was telling me about kind of when he joined the business, they were a design consultancy, and they were doing white label stuff. And it's like, you think of Dyson now, you can't think of the amount of products they shift with their badge on and the different innovation. You can't. It feels really alien to think of them as anything else, but it's like from those beginnings to then the first product. And you were involved in floor care for a lot of the time you were there, but then moved into energy storage. I don't know if that's anything that you're able to talk about, or is it one of the kind of projects?
I don't know where it was left. So I was part of redundancies 4 years ago from Dyson, but at the time they took out a layer of management in that team. Whether they continue to do that, I don't know. Yeah. But it was again fantastic opportunity. I really enjoyed the floor care stuff, particularly in research manager there. Just allowed me to do my day job and some extra stuff, which was great. And really the opportunity to go and work with the battery team was, it was just specifically solid state batteries. And they'd really kind of got themselves into a situation where they needed a little bit more structure. And I was fortunate enough to have teams of engineers, a couple of teams of engineers and some technical specialists and look after the lab as well. And a great health and safety guy, considering all the equipment, sort of to set the lab up and get it all sorted, really organised so that it would make a gradual progression as to what steps needed to be made.
Brilliant.
I couldn't tell you, though, what happened once I left. So, hopefully some of that work continued. Yeah,
there's so much going on behind the scenes there. I've spoken to hundreds of ex-Dyson employees over the years, and all the weird and wonderful things that they work on in innovation that just building up the patent list, I suppose, in some respects. But it's fascinating business. So you were part of the redundancies kind of in October, November 2020. I was very present then in kind of the market there. So how did you feel in that position? Because I guess that was the first time you'd been made redundant, and
it was.
Back into lockdown as well, I think.
It was the back end of lockdown. It was a little bit odd, and I'm sure a lot of the people who are going through redundancy at the moment probably have similar feelings. The way they'll kind of go through, sort of being upset, being angry, not understanding. As it turned out, I was actually off the day that they were all announced, so I missed being called into the room. And I found out from a colleague phoned me and said something's happening. It's like, okay.
Oh, crikey.
So it's just one of those things. But, sort of at the time, obviously, people say, it's not personal. And I think they must be business leaders typically, because from a business perspective, it's not personal. It's kind of a strategic decision that the business has decided it needs to do in order to progress, which I get. But I think what gets forgotten is that everybody are individual people. And to those individual people, it is exceptionally personal. It's like, how am I going to pay my mortgage? What am I going to do? Kids going to school or Christmas or whatever, So, at the time, you do take it very personally, I think. But, sort of, they're probably all sick of hearing it. There is light beyond, sort of when those things happen. Sometimes it happens for a reason that you'll go off and you do something else. Sometimes people take complete career change. And it's I think the easiest thing to think of it is it's a change. It's not necessarily a bad thing.
Absolutely. Sometimes it's bringing plans forward.
Yeah.
That you may have delayed. There's always reasons to stay somewhere, isn't there? But if you force on it, it pushes you closer to that opportunity, I think. Yeah. Not wanting to trivialize it, because it's a very frightening experience for a lot of people. But there is, definitely light at the end of the tunnel. And your light was the Imagination Factory. So you went back over to London.
I did.
Were you doing that commute then, or was that kind of remote then?
I did a bit of a mix, to be honest. Yeah. So the second part of it was partly in lockdown. So I was one of the few people travelling around, going into work sometimes. But also I would actually stay up there as well. So again, it just comes back to who you know and where you know people from. So the guys who set up the Imagination Factory, I used to work with that.
Julian Swan.
Yeah.
One of those.
Mark Hester.
Mark Hester, yeah.
So, sort of they knew who I was. I knew who they were. So I knew, sort of what sort of things they were into. There was a couple of other guys, Roger and Tris, both from PDD, so similar background as well. So, it was quite easy for me to sort of slip into working with those guys and then knowing what they're going to get back in return.
Massively, yeah.
It's really good fun, sort of just to get back into consultancy and just have that variety of work, really. It's what I really enjoy.
Yeah, they're working on some really interesting things as well. And I've seen the trend of this over the years of design consultancies spinning out ideas as well into their own kind of products or the kind of separate businesses, but then using the consultancy as the design arm. So Plasma Track being an example of that.
Yep.
And I imagine there's a handful of others. But did you work on the Plasma Track stuff while you were there, or was
no? So that was really it was basically I was moving into the sort of consultancy side of the business in order that sort of there could be a bit more management of the Plasma Track side of things.
Got you, yeah. Because I was going to say that's whilst you've had a big variety of different products that you've worked on over the years. That kind of Plasma Track unit's like something else, isn't it? That's a very different application, but so that's interesting. So yeah, back into consultancy, 2.5 years there, and then that kind of brings us up to date. Then, so what led to you kind of founding Cognate, which you've been doing for 18 months or so?
Partly the commute. So it was really opportunity for me to move. It was one of those things like I've always wanted to do it, but circumstances are such that, other financial pressures, you kind of go, well, can I afford to do it or risk doing it at the moment? The timing sort of seemed quite good, just sort of the age of my kids, sort of couldn't keep traveling up and down. And you sort of kind of get to an age and you just kind of go, well, if I'm going to do this, I should do it now. Because if I leave it another 5 or 10 years, I'm not going to do it. So bit the bullet and sort of decided, right, okay, no, I'll have a go at this and see how we go. But it's wildly exciting and terrifying, almost in the same breath, to sort of make that decision. And you'll question it for at least the first 6 months after you've done it. But it was, I'm pleased I did, sort of. So I changed. So I have a nice sort of 10-minute walk into work. So I actually rent a space from Matter MPD in the middle of Bath.
Oh yeah, brilliant.
So I work next door with them. So we do swap over a few projects. So help them out with some of the technical stuff and vice versa. And sort of it's great. Sort of it just sort of changes the work-life balance a little bit. But that said, if it's your own business and there's only one of you, when you start off, it's like there's no adjustment as to how you can adjust the resource other than more days a week, more hours a day kind of thing. And that's probably the hardest thing when you start off, I think.
Yeah. I was going to say, how important do you think, I know you're 18 months in, how important is that link with Matter or having someone kind of that, I guess, just knowing that there's someone there that's been through it and having that kind of support network or just network,
Yeah, exactly that. Just somebody to talk to apart from anything else. So what's really nice is, they'll just knock on the door and sort of say, oh, could you have a look at this? And, sort of what are your thoughts? We're not going to sort of start writing quotes and stuff for that sort of thing, but it's just what are your thoughts on this? And what about this? And vice versa. So it cuts both ways and it's just nice to have that dynamic. So, and what I didn't want to do was basically just work out of an office at home. Yeah. Because, sort of, I then struggled to sort of separate, well, what's work and what's, if I walk from the kitchen into my office, am I then at work? It's not a commute kind of thing. And the office is always there. So I really wanted it to be somewhere that I kind of go to work and I do my work there and then I come away. Doesn't always work like that, as I'm sure you spend a lot of time early doors, sort of spending a lot of evenings working on things to sort of try and put the hours in to get things in place. But just to actually have that dynamic is really nice. And I've been really lucky with sort of clients as well. So, sort of the first few months, absolutely, sort of bare bones. But the odd thing was that the bare bones were from people that I previously worked with, sort of, or, been at Herman Miller, so somebody from there, great guy, gave me some work, just bits and pieces. So it's enough to just tide me over. Once I got a slightly more substantial contract, just took the heat off a little bit.
Yeah.
And then I was fortunate enough to have just slightly random sort of just contacts, start up a couple of projects. There was a guy, Alex, who I work with now, who became available at the same time. Somebody walked in the door saying, I'd like to keep you busy for the next 6 months. So I was able to cover his costs. And then we've just stepped up from there. And as soon as you have an extra person, you've got that dynamic in terms of other people to speak to. So we've got Alex working with us, and we've got a couple of other guys who are working for me on contract.
Brilliant.
Just on some other projects. So again, it's just those dynamics. Contract's not really the way I want to be working with the other guys in my team, just purely because it's, it doesn't give them longer term security. And from my business point of view, it's not necessarily the most efficient way. But in order to service the contract that I have, then that's what I need to do.
Are you frustrated by drawn-out recruitment processes, missing out on talent to your competition, or wasting time interviewing candidates who don't quite live up to their profile? If you're the founder or leader of a physical technology brand or design consultancy, here's what we can do for you. By working closely with you and your team, Codu will help you improve your entire existence of hiring. We'll make it easier to identify, attract, and ultimately hire the very best design and engineering talent ahead of or from your competition. You'll only interview candidates who fit the brief, and we'll work with you to ensure you get the outcome you want in a timely manner, which is typically within 6 weeks or less. We have a 100% fill rate, and we guarantee to get you a positive outcome. If we don't deliver, you don't pay. But how can I make such a claim? Well, the short answer is I've been doing this for a very long time now. Our process at Codu is built from over a decade of my own personal experience recruiting within physical product design and development. I've hired hundreds of designers, engineers, managers and leaders in that time, over 97% of whom are still in post after 12 months. On top of that, I've personally built an incredible network of thousands of professionals in the physical product design and engineering space, covering the UK, US and Europe. And I've taken what I've learned over the years and put the best of that into Codu. So if you'd like to spend less time stuck in a recruitment loop and more time doing what you love, get in touch. Email chris@teamcodu.com or message me on LinkedIn. But for now, let's get back to the show. Yeah, it's the standard way to go as you're trying to scale or establish a design consultancy. I've seen it so many times over the years where, you have a kind of a core team of 2 or 3 kind of full-time staff, and you're complemented by freelancers and contractors. And it's just that resource you can turn on and off. But what tends to happen is that when you've got that resource and you're fulfilling projects, then you get more and more stuff on. So you end up having those contractors essentially full-time, but you're paying them the contract rate. So that it then becomes a decision as to whether you can take them on full-time or need to replace them, But that's just that's one of the pain points that every consultancy owner goes through at some point.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting. So you happy you did it then? No regrets?
Yeah, well, no regrets. Yeah. Touch wood.
Yeah.
Not yet. So sort of really pleased.
Good.
Yeah, every day has its challenges. Every day different. Yeah. Some days you feel like you go home and you've not achieved anything, despite the fact you've been busy all day and you can't remember what it is you've actually achieved. But other days, great. You get your head down and really make some progress. So there's no one else to blame because it's a small startup. You know exactly what's coming in the door. So sort of you're very sensitive to how much work you have. If you work in a big business, you can be a small cog in a big business. You might not feel you have the ownership, but you almost feel like, well, you have a right to have your salary at the end of the day because the bigger business is making its money. When you're quite so close to the coalface, you appreciate, sort of, well, how much money is coming in because that's going to be what pays you. And it's amazing how you sort of become so associated with that versus a big business.
Oh, massively. Yeah. It's, it's one of the things that I guess you consider, but until you're actually doing it, and you're actually in the business. But all the finances and the back office stuff all of a sudden becomes very real. And I'm slightly obsessive over my bank account and seeing the comings and goings in there, and knowing kind of just trying to forecast really what can I kind of pay myself, what can I invest in. When can I employ staff? It's like yeah, it's great but scary at the same time, because it's like, yeah, there's a lot on that. Go back to the beginning then. So you said it was kind of bare bones stuff. So you had a couple of kind of small contracts on. How did those come about? Was that proactive outreach on your part, or kind of?
Yeah, so as you have to sort of put yourself out there, and it's not necessarily the part of work that I naturally align myself to is sort of going and chasing work, but you have to just go and ask questions. Sort of get in contact, grow your network on LinkedIn, get to speak to people, and it's amazing how sort of somebody knows somebody. They don't all come, there's no guarantee they're all going to come good, but, just go around. So I went around, spoke to, everybody I knew when I was made redundant, because I was looking for jobs apart from everything else. So that was great, because that increased my network. So then when it came to actually setting up a business, you just send around an email to all those people that you've spoken to in the last few years, and just be going, no pressure, but, I'm available. I'm doing this now. If you've got any work, then it'd be great to hear from you, or even just catch up, or just stay in touch for something in the future. And that's all you can do. You just go around and just keep in contact with people. And fortunately, one or two people had a few things for me, which I was immensely grateful.
And how do you manage that then, in terms of from a consistency point of view of outreach? Do you have a CRM system that you use, or email?
I think managing it is probably what I'm poorest at the moment. And you can look at it. I look at my activity on LinkedIn, and that's usually a very big clue as to how busy I am, because if I'm not so busy, my LinkedIn activity is significantly busier. And then once if I'm up to my eyeballs, then it sort of my LinkedIn activity almost flatlines.
Yeah.
Until, Alex joins, and then that gave me a bit of headroom to actually do a bit more, and then all of a sudden you'll see a couple of flurry of spikes of activity again. It's probably been through another quiet stage, and it needs me to do a little bit more again. So traditionally, I'd always try and put, we used to at the Imagination Factory, try and put a morning a week aside. But again, while you're very small, if the work's there, you've got to do the work, because that's what pays the bills. So it's finding the time to do it.
I'm in the same boat. It's I literally carve time out to schedule my LinkedIn content. Obviously, carve time out to edit this podcast and do all that stuff. And it's the long game. You never know when that's going to kind of bear fruit, and kind of who might inquire. But I see it all the time in kind of consultancy and recruitment, and just generally on LinkedIn. You do see those peaks and troughs of activity, and you can tell when someone's kind of trying to get new work in. But if you can consistently do it, I think the trick is to consistently carve out, even if it's just an hour a week, to do something on it. That's going to pay dividends in the long run, in my experience. But you've got to be super disciplined. But then part of that's just communicating with your clients in terms of just extend your deadline by kind of a day or whatever, to give you that time. But easier said than done.
Yeah.
So in terms of some of the things that we obviously wanted to talk about, whilst we're recording this, obviously there's been we mentioned it earlier, there's been a bunch of kind of redundancies, a few hundred engineers and designers let go from Dyson. So there's a few other companies that have laid people off in the last month or so as well within the design space. So not a great kind of period of time, although I'm pretty confident that things will pick up for the market. But we discussed kind of your experience of reviewing CVs and some kind of tips and insights that you might want to share with people that are either kind of coming out of Dyson or anyone really that's at any stage of their career. So perhaps we could kind of go through some of that. You mentioned, one of your bugbears is that you've got these fantastic graduate courses or degree courses, and yet they're pumping out the same template of CV and portfolio. Yeah, we used to have. I used to get placement inquiry, basically applications for placement from students, and we used to use a couple of different places. So, typically Loughborough, Brunel, Bath, but we'd accept them from anywhere. But we had sort of links with those universities, and it was amazing to see the difference. So, Bath very much a very academic, more based university, and you'd sort of, for a lot of the applicants there, they wouldn't even have a portfolio.
and they'd send me, and they'd basically have a CV, but it would be the same format of CV from all of them. So, it just doesn't convey any personality or anything like that. But then we'd find that, it's almost the opposite from Brunel. So Brunel they would send a lovely kind of glossy, shiny portfolio, really good. And it just makes it so much easier to engage with them because you've got something to, when you interview them, you've got something to talk about, to look at, ask them questions about. It doesn't have to be any great detail in it. And a lot of what I see is people worried about whether I can put stuff in my portfolio because of conflicts of interest. And it's like, well, just if you think it's a real conflict of interest, what you've been specifically doing to what you're particularly going to, just take it out for that particular application. It's just people, I think, get almost a little bit too hung up on, how polished should it be, all this kind of thing. And say, even if you have nothing, then think of some little design problems, do some sketches, do some calculations, do some CAD, see if you can find somebody to make a little model for you and show that it works. And just put that as a little design package together in a portfolio. It's great because you can understand the design process and you can talk to them about it and what happened here and why did you decide to do that. And it just makes it so much easier to be able to communicate with somebody, you have very limited contact with. I mean, you'll know more than anyone how short a time people actually spend looking at a CV.
Oh, massively, yeah.
If your CV is kind of just presentable, structured, and not too long, people will be far quicker to just, take their few seconds to skim it, to put it in the yes pile as opposed to the no pile. Whereas if you've got a sort of block of grey on your screen that looks the same as several other blocks of grey, the likelihood is, unless there's something particularly impressive that catches your eye, it probably ends up in the no pile compared to some of the other ones.
That's it, yeah. I think it's something like 7 seconds or less is kind of the average time spent reviewing or screening a CV.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and I know from my personal experience that I'm much more likely to spend longer kind of interrogating a CV that sticks out.
Yeah.
For good or bad reasons, really. As long as it's different, like you say, to the generic. If it looks like the last 5 CVs, then with the best will in the world, you're probably going to miss stuff. I mean, my standard kind of approach is look at kind of the companies that they've worked at, look at the degree course. Does it kind of stack up with the kind of things that my clients look for? Because I'm not necessarily screening against a particular job. I'm screening against a job and future jobs. So I want to know whether this person is right for my kind of my candidate pool, if you like. Whereas if you're more likely to get a call from someone like myself that's kind of got the long-term vision, as opposed to a poor internal recruiter who's got maybe 30 jobs and they're all different kind of specs. They're skimming for keywords. They're skimming for maybe a handful of companies that have been given to them by the line manager. And if they're not sure, I think they probably go into the reject pile because it's too hard work to find out because they've got another 100 to review, if not more.
So quick question for you then. How long should it be? Because it's a classic where people say, well, how long? My CV is still 2 pages, 2 sides, basically.
It depends, and this is a cop-out, but in my opinion, it depends on how much experience you have and what you've been doing. I think if you're a fresh grad, you're going to struggle to fill 2 pages anyway, because unless you're putting in some imagery, I don't want to say pad it out, but fresh grad, you're talking about
you can
what
go into a lot more detail, can't you?
Yes, absolutely. If you've got 20 plus years experience, then realistically, the company's only really interested in diving into the detail of the last 10 years, if that. But 3 or 4 pages of that is absolutely fine, so long as the first page makes the reader want to carry on reading. So it's got to be clear who you are and how to contact you right at the top. The amount of CVs I've seen where they bury the contact details in the footer or on the last page. It's like, if you're making it hard, you're putting friction, you're putting barriers in the way. So front and center, where you are, and if you're based in Bath and you're applying for jobs in London, then mention that, right at the top, where you are in terms of kind of career as well. So your current or most recent job needs to be on the first page. There's no point put in a load of skills, and I don't think anyone reads through the skills list. Personally, I think it's a valuable kind of asset on your CV so that you appear on recruiter searches. But most line managers, and you can probably correct me if I'm wrong here, but most line managers are going to be going, right, this person's worked at the Imagination Factory, they've worked at Dyson, I recognise those brands, I know what they do, they look similar to what we're trying to do. Let's have a conversation.
Absolutely.
So I think, if you're a mechanical design engineer at Dyson, yes, there's going to be lots of variety in terms of what product you've worked on and what stage you're at, but there's going to be fundamental skills there that are going to tweak the kind of the imagination of a line manager. Maybe not so much an internal recruiter who isn't as kind of well versed on the ins and outs, but I think, going back to the original question, is that, current job on page 1, and then however many pages it takes then to kind of tell your story. But the skills should only be in there just as it's just so you appear on searches. Achievements, I think you definitely need to work in your achievements, ideally into the specific jobs. If there's if you can have your headline achievements at the top in your summary, then great, but make them tangible, make them kind of, if you've increased, rather than saying I've increased sales by 200%, it's like, that doesn't mean anything, because you need to put some actual tangible figures in there to make it real. You can say 200%, which was 2 billion or whatever, get that stuff in, because that's the kind of difference, that once they've seen the headline kind of job titles and the companies that you've worked for, then they start interrogating that okay, this person goes from a yes to a definitely get them on the shortlist, or definitely speak to them about being on the shortlist. So I could wax lyrical about this for ages. No,
it's interesting to hear. Yes, so I think it was one of the useful things that came out of the redundancy from Dyson was actually just sort my CV out a little bit better. But sort of they actually worded it quite nicely to so each of your job roles, sort of a brief summary. So this is the business, and this is what you were doing in the business, your responsibilities, and then this is what you achieved in that role. And it's kind of like, it then just makes sense to people, and you can just structure in that way, and it just makes it easy to read.
Massively. I would highly recommend anyone that's going through redundancy if the company is offering outplacement services like that, they're offering kind of career advice, take it up, because even if you don't find the value in it, there will be value in those things. But even if it doesn't significantly change it, at least you've been through it. And then I would say speak to your peers and speak to people like myself and get a kind of independent review, because again, it's like with the universities, the outplacements will have a structure, they'll have a format that they recommend. Get an opinion that's specific to your industry, and try and make it stand out as well. So I don't often get asked the questions on this. It's usually the way around, Tim. So thank you. No, that's good. So what are some of the things that you've seen then over the years that have really stood out, or things that people have done to get your attention?
Fortunately, nothing too spectacular, but there are some, sort of people who have sent portfolios in who, ridiculously, it's like a brochure, and they must have taken months and months over it. And people other people are going, well, how am I ever going? You show it to them, and they're, well, how am I ever going to compete with that? It's like, well, you don't need to.
No.
And actually, usually just showing a few pages of the process, really what sort of stand out. And actually, people being enthused is something else that comes across as well. So usually if I've been interviewing people, there'll be quite a few, and we'll do sort of half an hour, just sort of a meet and greet and introduce one another. But even just from a couple of those kinds of meetings, you pick up, how keen are they? Do they really want this job? What drives them? What enthuses them to sort of, I love this stuff? What motivates them? And can you pick up, sort of what do they not like doing? And there's nothing wrong with people not liking things. I'm sure you're in the same position as I am with having to do all the finance and tax and stuff of your own business. Then it's like, it's not exciting and you don't like doing it. It has to be done. But you just kind of, there's nothing wrong with saying you don't like it.
Yeah.
It's not your favorite thing, and you get on and you do it. But what you do really like is all of this stuff. And that's where you really add value to, sort of to what clients want.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, it's not necessarily do you like doing it. It's like, will you do it and can you do it, and does it affect your ability to do the stuff that you do like doing, that you're going to add a lot of value to? So then I guess it's a business decision on, okay, so how can we delegate some of that bit? I've always, it's something that as a manager and director in my previous business, it's something that I learned kind of fairly late on, really, or that kind of I did some kind of management training, and I was forever frustrated by trying to get people to upskill kind of across the board. And then someone said to me, kind of, they're great at some things, but they're weak in this. So let's focus on these areas and upskill you there so you can become rounder. And so my naivety, I thought that was the right strategy. And someone said to me, like, why are you kind of trying to get this person to do all these things that they don't enjoy? They're not going to put their effort in.
Yeah.
And you're neglecting the stuff that they're really good at. Focus your energy on what they're great at and empower them to do that more. And then find someone else to do the bits that they're not good at. Someone that enjoys doing those bits. And you'll kind of, they'll have a better life. The business will have a better time, and you as the manager have a better time because you're not kind of getting wound up that someone can't do it as good as you or isn't kind of excited about upskilling.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I mean, it used to be a trait at Dyson a little bit. It's like, they're the ideal sort of person. We'll just keep cloning them. And it's like, well, so that's not, everybody's individual. So they all work their own ways. They have their own ways of thinking, and understanding that, and then knitting them together as a good team is really sort of more powerful, I feel.
Absolutely. So we mentioned as well when we were preparing for this that people who take the initiative to post their portfolio to or reach out directly, regardless of whether the company's advertising, has been, because I mean, in my experience, very few job openings are actually advertised. So so you never know. What would be your advice to someone in that what should be their strategy if they're kind of all of a sudden looking for?
Just be proactive. So find out who works in that area, and if they're not advertising, send them a CV and an email, sort of little covering letter, whatever. So I think the last 2 CVs that I've had across my desk they've come into Matt next door, and he's sent them my way because they're more technical.
Okay.
But sort of whoever it is, again, going back to placements, people sort of send me the CV and a little portfolio to explain their work. And to be honest, they go straight on the list because they've been proactive about coming to find me in the first place. So I know there's some get up and go about them, and some that proactivity that you have to have basically.
Yeah.
So
a little bit more effort.
I wouldn't. It can be a little bit depressing. So I do try and always make a point of, if anybody does write to me, if it's not appropriate, then I'll say to them, sort of, I haven't got anything at the moment, but thank you for sending your time and effort. Yeah. Because I think that's the very least they deserve. A lot of companies you won't even get a reply from, but people shouldn't get disheartened. And, if you sent it to one person, try and send it to somebody else a few months later. Maybe it's gone to the wrong person, or, gone to the wrong desk, or, it's been filed in the wrong place. But don't just give up. I know it can be really frustrating, but keep harassing. But equally, if somebody politely says no, then maybe try them 6 months, 12 months down the line.
Absolutely, that persistence pays off. And I think kind of relating it to my kind of business development and the advice I'd always give to people in my teams is, like, if you're only approaching one person in an organization, you're only giving yourself one opportunity. And that message, as well kind of crafted as it may be, the portfolio that you're saying could be absolutely incredible, but it could be either the wrong timing, or it ends up in spam or in their inbox, or doesn't actually get through to them. So you've wasted all the energy. So if you add 2 more contacts in there, and there's always another contact, like worst case scenario, like you've had with Mata, it's like they'll forward that on to the appropriate person, but you're giving yourself another 2 opportunities for that within one organization. And then companies like Dyson, I mean, you could probably have 100 kind of relevant contacts that might be worth reaching out to. Brilliant. Well, look, we're rapidly approaching time. I appreciate your insights there. It's good to get kind of some specific advice around CVs. But let's talk about kind of podcasts. I always ask people kind of about podcasts and books that they read and that they can recommend. So what are your kind of go-to recommendations when it comes to books or podcasts, Tim?
I'm pretty bad for podcasts, but because I spend too much time sat in front of a computer anyway. So if I get to a book, it's usually on a holiday, and I tend to like to read things that are a little bit different, sometimes a little bit technical. Not technical from an engineering point of view, but last year there was Super Senses that I read, which is a really good book. It's just, it's quite a good read when you're on holiday with your family, because you end up doing lots of little experiments on them to see whether it's really true or not. And it's surprising how true it is. People live their lives completely unaware of these kinds of things. It's quite amusing.
So and then, Super Senses.
Yeah, Super Senses. I can't remember who wrote it, but it's all about sort of, how your body sort of connects. And this year I read Michael Mosley's Just One Thing book, because that was a nice light read while I was away on holiday. And that just reinforced why I stand on one leg brushing my teeth and things like that. Sort of, they're all little things that are kind of, whether they're health or science or just, if anybody's got any recommendations, do let me know. Pop me a note on LinkedIn, because I do like to have a read, but just struggle to find the time to do it.
Absolutely, yeah. I've switched over to Audible, so I tend to buy. I like it's boring, but I like business books specific around sales and psychology. Surprisingly for the work that I do. So my recommendation is always Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. In fact, I have it on my desk. I don't know if it's blurry, but fantastic read just in terms of negotiations. That plays into a lot of the human psychology and human nature around why we do things and the kind of unconscious kind of decisions that we make, and just playing into those. So it's about influence, but it's kind of stopping short of manipulation and Darren Brown voodoo stuff. It's but it's really, really good. Using some of the techniques in the book, this week I've managed to negotiate a big discount on my mobile phone bill for the tariff for the company. I've saved money on my LinkedIn premium account, and it's all sorts of different things, all the different softwares that I use. I make it a point to try and use some of the strategies in the book. It's fantastic. I was speaking to a client earlier who's a small design consultancy in the Midlands, and he's been ghosted by one of his clients, kind of in terms of they're getting lots of yeses months ago to kind of, we're going to go ahead with this project. I just need another week, and you check in. Oh yeah, we're definitely going ahead. I'm just waiting for the purchase order. Lots of excuses. And I said, have you read Never Split the Difference? Because what he was telling me there resonated with one of the chapters in the book, where it's like, you don't actually know what's going on in that person's world. They're only telling you what they want to tell you in that, and there's probably stuff going on behind the scenes where they don't have control, and they're embarrassed to share that with the consultancy. So the easier way is just to avoid that. So there's a great kind of power play that it recommends in that. When you get to that situation, is to just drop them an email and say, have you given up on this project? It's very kind of direct, just one line. Have you given up on this project? And you get a response, because that person feels compelled to reply to that. And then you start uncovering, okay, what are the limitations that they're not sharing with you? And that's when kind of through the case studies they talk about in the book and kind of the people I've spoken to over the years, it's that then you start uncovering the barriers that they haven't talked to you about. And then you've got things that you can hopefully help them solve, or not. It's okay to move on, but at least then it kind of brings those problems to the front. And I think that's a very specific example, but there's loads in there that especially for consultancy businesses. That book's absolute gem. So there you go. You can have that.
For product innovation, there's Black Box Thinking is quite good as well, and Bounce is obviously quite a well-known one.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Yeah, I'll check those out. The Super Senses book, I believe it's this one by Emma Young, The Science of Your 32 Senses and How to Use them. Bro. Well, I'll link all these in the show notes. And then in terms of the kind of LinkedIn side of things, obviously people can get in touch with you via LinkedIn. I'll share the link there. Is there kind of any advice you would give people that wanted to work with you or apply for roles kind of in the future? Because that might be kind of something you might be considering later in the year. But also we've talked about reaching out. Is there any particular format that you prefer, or anything that people should try?
No, I mean, sort of like we said, make sure it's a nice, good, concise CV that's nicely laid out, and a little bit of a portfolio to go with it to tell me how great you are. And Brilliant. Then a lot of it is about your own enthusiasm and interest in that kind of line of work.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's usually how we work. So, and if I don't have anything at the moment, feel free to send it anyway, because sort of the least I'll do is just sort of say to you, you're happy if I keep on record for a little while. So if we're a few months down the road and I'm bombarded with project work, then I know who to come in contact.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's like your kind of case with Alex. It's like it's just fortuitous timing, and that's in my experience that happens so often. I'll speak to someone who I don't have a role for 1 week, and then 2 weeks later we're catching up because we've just had a new project come in.
Yeah.
That's how it works. But wonderful. All right. Well, look, Tim, it's been really nice talking to you. Thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Sure, you're welcome. Thank you very much.
Yeah, great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Design Journeys podcast. I hope you found it insightful and inspiring. If you did, please consider sharing it with a friend or colleague who might enjoy it too. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Before I sign off, just a quick note from me. Besides hosting this podcast, I'm also the founder of Codu, a recruitment business that specialises in physical product development. We help startups, established brands and consultancies find top-tier mechanical design and development talent, often in as little as 6 weeks. At Codu, we're all about providing an outstanding experience, with our clients and candidates consistently rating us plus 88 on the Net Promoter Score, or NPS, which is world-class in recruitment. Oh, and I should probably mention we have a 100% fill rate too. The inspiring people I've met over the years in consumer electronics, e-bikes, medical devices and beyond have been the reason behind creating this podcast. If you'd like to know more about Codu and how we can help your business, feel free to visit teamcodu.com or connect with me, Chris Whyte, on LinkedIn. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.